Hello.
Chris, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, no worries, no worries.
I see you've got your guitar.
Yeah, I'm sitting here learning. It's so surreal. I'm sitting here learning. Well, going over a bunch of Michelle Wright songs. I was
Right.
just going over Take a Lady Man, and I'm like, I'm thinking back to, you know, when I first started and how massive Michelle Wright was playing sold out arenas, and I'm sitting here learning songs to go on a tour with her. It still blows me away.
You're still a fan of country music, even after being in the business for all these years.
Yeah, well, I mean, country music has evolved so many times in so many ways that you can't stop being a fan. It almost reminds me a little bit of classic rock from the 60s and 70s, really. Like it never seems to go away, but it seemed to transform from, the Beatles kind of, yeah, 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 to a little bit more serious flower power kind of stuff. And then the Doobie Brothers came in and, you know, and then you had the 80s, but, country kind of started it seemed a little bit later with every genre. Like you'd have the old country, and then you had the Whalens, then you had the Alabamas in the '80s, and it just and even in the last 20 years, it's and even now with the Chris Stapletons and all these great songs coming out, it just seems to always come full circle. So yeah, I just can't stop being a fan.
Well, when given the opportunity to interview one of the three acts that was performing for the Great Canadian Roadshow, I immediately put my hand up and said, I want to interview Doc Walker because after 20 years, I get to say thank you to you because you played a pivotal moment in part of my career without even realizing it.
Oh, okay.
So I'll tell you more about that here in just a second. But first, let's talk about Doc Walker. So first off, congratulations. There's not a lot of acts that have been able to hang around for that long and are still able to draw crowds and make music that people want to hear, but you guys are still out there doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it has been a long road, but I think it was always a conscious thing, right? From I guess from when Dave and I first started playing together, and then we played bars all across Canada back in the early '90s. And when we were a bar band, we always tried to play different songs. Like we didn't play the top 40. We did, of course, to get people to dance for. But we always wanted a bit of Doc Walker spice. And then we became unique in the bar industry. And then when we started making music, we wanted to throw in the Doc Walker stamp with songs like, Rocket Girl, for example, was never supposed to be a radio hit, but we loved it. So we put it in the record. And then That Train, Driving with the Brakes On, If I Fall, uh, just a lot of those songs really kind of gave the meat on the bones for the band.
And this is probably a difficult question, but having been doing this for so long, what has been the best moment? And maybe not the best, but the one where you thought, holy smokes, I can't believe I get to do this
Well,
for a living.
I guess it would be on well, there's so many of them, but the latest one I can think of, and probably one of the biggest, is hanging out watching the Grey Cup. Well, the Bombers lost, but watching the Grey Cup with Mark Miller from Sawyer Brown backstage. And I remember I had a picture of me when I was about 12 years old down in North Dakota in front of the Sawyer Brown buses. My parents took me down there, and these buses pulled up, and they're these brown old Eagle buses. Well, new at the time. So I got a picture in front of him. The bus driver let me stand in the door, and I was about 12. So I'm sitting with Mark, and we're watching the football game backstage, and I go, "Hey, check this out," because I took a picture of the Polaroid on my phone, and he was like, he went through the story of that used to be that bus was called the Gambler, and Kenny Rogers basically gave it to them, and he goes through the story, and then he goes on stage, and he said something about Doc Walker, and then he started singing "The Walk," which is one of my favorite songs. And I just remember at that moment going, wow, that's a lot of years. I'm 46 years old, and at 12 years old, I was standing in front of their bus, and now the dude's like saying, "Hey, Doc Walker," and to me, it was like I've never really had those moments in my life where I go, "I've made it."
Yeah.
Because you always want the next thing, right? You want the next single, you want the next bigger show, you want the newer bus, but at that moment, I think I finally had that. moment of you're here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And are you still a Bombers fan?
Yeah, yeah, still
So head coach Mike O'Shea is from North Bay. In fact, the
nice.
football field is named after him here.
Yeah, well, you're gonna get a rough and tumble guy like Mike from North Bay. He's got North Bay written all over him.
Right. So the music biz has changed a lot, obviously, since you first got in it with, digital and streaming and just the way the whole thing works. If you could go back 30, 40 years and talk to the young Chris and Doc Walker, what advice would you have had, knowing
None,
what you know now?
nothing. I wouldn't tell him a thing because he would have put his guitar down and never picked it up again.
Hmm.
Like if I could go back to when I was 14, when I first started Doc Walker and say, well, now you're going to want to make cassettes. Well, then they're going to be CDs. Then nobody's going to want CDs. And all of a sudden music's going to be free and you're not going to make money off it anymore. And then you're going to have live music. So you're going to be successful enough to go around and play live music. And then there's going to be this pandemic but you can't play guitar for 2 years. And then I would be like, what? No, I'm not doing that.
Right. It's a good
So,
point.
and I think it's a lot of the bumps along the road that make the songs, right? Like,
Mhm.
I mean, I really wouldn't tell myself anything because I was so focused. And somebody looked at me one day and said, well, the world needs a dreamer. you know I wouldn't want to take that excitement away from anybody.
Still cool to hear your songs on the radio after all these years?
Oh yeah, it's funny, we took a trip to Edmonton about a couple years ago, maybe, with the family, and we listened to the radio all the way to Edmonton, and then we went to Banff and then drove home. And my wife looks at me on the way home. She goes, we heard your songs like 20 times in this trip. I'm like, yeah. She goes, I still find it weird because you're just my husband. And then all of a sudden their song comes on. I keep forgetting about that part of you,
Right.
and I do too. It's nice to hear that people still play the songs.
Because music is obviously a huge part of your life, but do you own a campground now?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in 2011, my parents had been looking at some lakefront property, and then in 2007, my mom passed away. And I always loved it, and we grew up along the lake here. So for me, I wanted to have a piece of that. And then in 2011, I ended up buying the property that my parents were looking at, and I subdivided some lakefront lots for cabins. And then the lake flooded in 2011, so I didn't know what to do with it. But in the process of the lake flooding, it dumped like tons of sand on the beach and made this beautiful beach. So I decided to start a seasonal campground because my friends would come and stay at my cabin all the time and plug their campers in. So a light bulb went off one day. I'm like, well, why don't you put them over there on the beach?
Might as well charge them.
So yeah, so we ended up. It's funny because my wife kind of came up with the name because I'm Icelandic, with being Thorsteinson, and a lot of my family settled in around Lake Manitoba. So we looked up, and it's not Icelandic, but it's a Norwegian name, Vakker. Actually, Vakker is beautiful, so it's called Beautiful Beach in Norwegian. So
Well, and I'll tell you how I discovered that is preparing for this chat. I Googled you, and an article came up about like someone saved someone's life at a
oh yeah,
campground, and it was the owner's name was you, and I thought it's got to be the same guy, right?
oh I know. Yeah, we lost a guy. He decided to go on his boat, like a little 12-foot boat, and I mean Lake Manitoba is the 33rd biggest lake in the world.
Okay.
Like, it's not small. Like, when you think of how many lakes are in the world and put that at 33, you probably don't want to go out in a 12-foot boat in a storm. So he ended up across. It's funny now because they found him, but he ended up across the lake. The big Hercules airplane was looking for him, and there was all CTV and CBC and CJOB and all these news places. I tried to hide in the bush as long as I could, but they finally got him.
So let's talk about the Great Canadian Roadshow. Michelle Wright,
Yeah.
Jason McCoy, Doc Walker. How did all that come together?
Well, it started with me talking to our agent, and it's the road trip, Great Canadian Road Trip, because it's a road trip. Those are always
Right. Yeah.
fun.
Yes.
But so I was talking to Todd, and we threw a whole bunch of ideas around. And like we had Tom Cochran, we had Emerson Drive again. We had so many different ideas, and we'd done the George Canyon and Charlie Major and the Roadhammers thing, and we did the Emerson Drive thing. I always loved that packaging up something for fans, right? Just because I mean, I went to the grocery store the other day. 2 bags of groceries were like $80. So
Yeah.
I was like, is there bottles of wine in here? Or is this lettuce?
Yeah.
So anyway, we want to keep, the tickets reasonable, but have a lot of bang for your buck. And, Jason, it was just an easy choice because he's got so many songs and he's such a performer and a ringmaster. I mean, he's the best at what he does.
Mhm.
And then Michelle's name came up, and I was really hoping that she'd agree to it, just to have that the legacy of Michelle Wright on a bill is pretty amazing. So,
Mhm.
we've been Zoom calling a lot this last week, going over songs, and it's just going to be a pretty amazing night.
October 19th is the North Bay date at the Capitol Center, capitalcenter.org for tickets on that. What else is coming up for Doc Walker aside from the tour?
Well, we've actually been hanging out with Murray quite a bit lately. It's funny because when Murray, everybody in the industry is like, "Oh, Murray quit Doc Walker." It's like, no, he stayed home he wanted to pursue producing and spend time with his family. His kids were all at that age. He didn't want to be on the road. But we ended up probably writing with Murray more after he left the band than while he was in the band.
Hmm.
And we go up to my cabin and write all the time. And we'd really like to plan not necessarily a return to Murray Pulver, but since we've been working with him so much, we'd like to do maybe an EP of 3 songs that Murray's played on all the songs in the studio since he's left the band too. So it's like he left, but he didn't, you
Right.
know. It's like breaking up with your husband, but he just keeps staying in the basement,
Right.
which is probably something I would do. But
Right. Right.
anyway, no, and we've got a couple great ideas, a couple cover songs that are so obscure. Like we're actually looking at a Talking Head song that, yeah,
Very cool.
just leave it to Doc Walker to go way out to left field. But we're pretty excited about it, and we'd love to put together a tour, 2025, maybe late 2024, early 2025, and get Murray back on the road for a tour would be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you doing this. I mentioned that 20 years in the making this conversation. So it was August 2003. You guys played North Bay at our Heritage Festival down at the
Yeah,
waterfront. And it was the first time as a young radio broadcaster that I was ever asked to introduce an act on stage. And there
nice.
was a big crowd there. Our Heritage Festival would get thousands of people. And so I remember I was pacing backstage and I thought I felt like I was going to be sick, everything else. And I came over to you and I said, what do you want me to say? Because some acts are very specific about, we want this mention, this mention, this mention. And you said, whatever you want. We're cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was standing beside the stage and I was still, very antsy. And I said, okay, well, you tell me when you're ready. And you turned to me and said, we're ready whenever you are. You just go up and have fun.
Yeah.
And I went up there and I introduced the show and brought you guys on. You guys came on and played She Hasn't Always Been This Way. I'll always remember that. It was your first song on the set.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking how much better I felt when I walked off that stage because you guys were so cool and relaxed. And if it had been different, you had been, high strung and maybe not so
Yeah.
nice. Some acts aren't.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would have affected me. So I always have
Aw.
appreciated that. And I've told that story many times.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's it's funny because even to this day, we have some newer radio people come in, or even veteran radio people, and the show goes on at 8 o'clock, and a lot of bands are like, "Hey, we this time and this time and this time," and half the time the drummer's still in the dressing room. Dave, I don't know where Dave is. They're like, "You guys ready?" I'm like, "I think so." The guys just call us, and everybody will get up to the stage eventually.
Yeah. Well, I think the
Yeah.
other thing you said is, do you want to drop by the trailer for a beer? And I was too nervous. I said no. But I
Well,
took you up on
that's
that now. So,
yeah. Well, when we come there, we're gonna have to drop by for a beer this time.
all right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. So it's Doc Walker, Michelle Wright, Jason McCoy, the Great Canadian Road Trip, October
Yep.
19th at the Capitol Center.
Awesome. I hope, like I said, it's one of those times that is probably not going to come around again when you get to see Michelle Wright, Jason McCoy, and then us stinking up the stage. I don't know. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Thanks, man. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Okay, we'll see you.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great day.
You too. Okay,
Bye.
bye bye.